All right. Can you guys hear me? Let me check the phone to see if you can hear me. All right. Fantastic. Well, I wish I could be there in person with everyone. It's certainly been a tough year. I haven't been to my office at AFBF since March. I haven't done just about any traveling since this point. I know I was really looking forward to potentially coming out there this year and really visiting with everyone out there in Wyoming. What I thought I would do this evening is just give a brief overview on where we are with some major farm economic indicators, where we've been this from a policy perspective, touch a little bit on trade, touch a little bit on markets. I want to talk a little bit about cattle markets, talk about our cattle market working group, and then really give everyone an opportunity to ask any questions that they may have from a policy perspective, what AFBF is doing, how we're working in Washington, D.C. to help our members, and how we expect to be engaged here on Capitol Hill over the next few months as we kind of move forward from a policy perspective. If we think about just where we've been over the last few years, it's been a pretty challenging year in 2019. We had a lot of producers due to excessive flooding, whether it was in Missouri, Iowa, Nebraska, up in the Dakotas, just were unable to get a crop in the ground in 2019. So it was a pretty tough year. We had nearly 20 million acres go unplanted due to flooding. And you can see in the chart here, it kind of shows a heat map of where the late planted crop and the intensity of prevent plant was the greatest. In response to what we saw in 2019, as well as the hurricanes that we saw come up through the Gulf and along the East Coast, we did see Congress come in and pass two different disaster packages to help producers recover from those natural disasters, whether it was a wildfire, hurricane, flooding. We're working right now on the Hill in this next appropriations package or next omnibus package to get additional funding for ad hoc disaster assistance to help producers that have been impacted in recent months by excessive precipitation or the wildfires in California. We had some of the wine grape producers that had some challenges there. So it's no secret that we've been dealing with increasing natural disasters across agriculture, and that's had an impact on producers across the country. It's no secret also that we've had a pretty tough go of it the last few years on the trade front. In 2018, when China put tariffs on just about 99% of our agricultural products, we saw our exports to China drop by about 50% from 2017 to 2018. And you can see that in this chart. Our ag exports in 2019 slowed. They went down by about 2% to $137 billion. We continued to import. Our imports grew by 2% to $131 billion. And again, a lot of that's on the back of reduced demand from China. And so our trade balance, which is the difference between our exports and our imports, which has been positive for 40 plus years, reached its lowest level in quite some time in 2019 at about $6 billion. So I say all that to say we came into 2020 with a bit of optimism. When we think about the phase one agreement with China, we think about USMCA that was signed. We think about the phase one. We think about the new Japanese agreement that gave us better market access there. We think about Chorus. I think producers were optimistic that we were putting the trade war behind us. We were putting all the bad weather behind us. And 2020 was going to be a better year. We saw growers this year plant more corn, more soybean acres this year than they did last year. Again, a lot of that due to the historic flooding that producers were dealing with in 2019. Wheat acres did fall this year to slightly more than 44 million acres. I think going into next year, I think the stronger prices we've seen could push wheat acres up to around 46 million acres. Nevertheless, in 2020, we saw the lowest wheat acreage planted in some 100 years or so. but we knew we were going to have the crops come back online in a pretty big way this year. So again, it was, back in January, February, a lot of it was talking about what's the demand side going to look like, how are exports going to step up to help us deal with these larger supplies that were coming online this year from a corn, soybean, wheat perspective. We also were anticipating very strong production on the livestock side. Poultry production was expected to climb 1%. Pork production was expected to jump 4%. And beef production was expected to continue to grow, but only up about 1% in 2020. We knew that the meat case was going to be competitive this year because of strong production across all three of those. We also expected record dairy production in 2020. So again, I think there was a sense of optimism at the beginning of the year that we were finally turning the corner. Trade was going to improve, and maybe we'd start to see higher prices from a farm economy perspective. Let's see, something just happened in my headset. There we go. Can you guys still hear me? Okay, I'll keep going unless somebody says otherwise. I think the optimism that we saw at the beginning of the year, that light at the end of the tunnel, actually turned out to be a freight train. And if you look at this chart, shows the daily change in COVID-19 cases every day, and you go back to March 12th when this was declared a pandemic and the shelter-in-place orders went into place. Since that point in time, we continue to deal with new waves and new surges of COVID-19. And I think all the state farm bureaus across the country stepped up immediately to deal with all of the challenges that COVID-19 placed on us, from the loss of retail sales to supply chain disruptions, to working with the Department of Labor to make sure we had a guest worker program that continued to function. I can't think of how many things we were engaged in to make sure that we could reduce the regulatory burden and keep farmers going in the face of COVID-19. We worked on several relief packages with the Secretary of Agriculture to get dollars out to producers impacted by COVID. Where we find ourselves today is, I think yesterday we had 144,000 new confirmed cases. There are starting to be discussions about whether some states issue lockdown orders again. I was just reading before we started this that Oregon is going to go on a 2-week lockdown. They'll close restaurants for indoor dining, close other non-essential businesses. And what that will do when we see that, and if it occurs in other places, what that'll do to the ag supply chain could potentially cause more disruptions. If we look, the red line here is grocery store sales. So you can see how it spiked in March as everyone was panic buying in the face of the pandemic. But you can also see how food service and drinking sales from February to March, I believe food service dropped by some 80-90%. So very, very sharp decline in food service. The immediate impact was significant and severe across the country. Had dairy farmers that were dumping milk, had folks plowing under perfectly good specialty crops because they just didn't have a market to go to for the products that they had produced. That created a lot of volatility in the commodity markets. We also saw right around this time, many of the meat packing plants start to go down because workers were getting sick, or workers were afraid to go to work because they didn't want to get sick. We did work with the administration on the executive order to make sure that PPE equipment was delivered, that these meat packing plants could continue to function. I think we're in a much better position now. I think we've got the hook space, we've got the animals. I don't fear as much today about a meat packing plant going down like they did back in April, just because of the PPE equipment that they have in place. But we do continue to see that food service sales are lagging where they were pre-COVID. And if you take all the expenditures, grocery stores and food service sales, we're still spending about $80 billion less year to date compared to year ago levels. So We still got some challenges in front of us with respect to COVID-19, and some of those could get more significant if we see states reinstitute some shelter-in-place orders. The immediate impact on commodity prices was pretty significant, pretty rapid. When we had shelter in place, people weren't driving. That meant gasoline demand fell sharply. We blend about 10% of our ethanol into gasoline. So ethanol demand fell sharply. And as a result of that, the feedstock for these ethanol plants, corn, grain, sorghum, in some parts of the country, those prices fell pretty rapidly too, because the ethanol plant were idling their processing capacity just because they weren't profitable. We all know what happened when the meat packing plants went down. You had market-ready animals with no hooks. And so we saw live cattle prices, feeder cattle prices drop pretty significantly, both of which fell by more than 30% in the immediate aftermath of COVID-19. Hog prices dropped significantly as well. When those processing facilities went down, we had a lot of animals that had to get euthanized because they didn't have a home. Shelf-stable products like rice, we saw rice prices rise by as much as 70% for that nearby rice futures contract. We saw class 3 milk prices rise pretty rapidly on the back of government purchases. But for producers trying to market at any point during this time, there was an incredible amount of volatility in the prices day to day because we just did not know the path of the virus and what the long run implications on demand or the economy would be. Just check my phone here, make sure that there's no questions coming in. And what we've seen since that point in time, a lot of the sectors have bounced back. From the ethanol side, you can see the dramatic reduction in production that occurred this year. Ethanol production declined by more than 40%. Those facilities began to come back online, in recent months. And what we're seeing this year through the first 8 to 10 weeks of the crop marketing year, ethanol production is about 5 to 6% below year ago levels. So we think we've stabilized there. But again, if we see shelter in place kick in, if people are encouraged to work from home, that could again impact gasoline demand, impact our blending capacity for ethanol, and ultimately impact our crop prices. So that's something that we continue to pay attention to. We also are paying attention from a policy perspective on initiatives around electric vehicles. I know California had an executive order to make all vehicles electric by, I believe, 2030. So from a policy perspective, we continue to work there on what that would do to the biofuel sector, the renewable fuel sector, corn demand, and soybean-based biodiesel demand. So in the short run, this is our first challenge. In the long run, I think the electric vehicles pose a bigger threat to our renewable fuel sector. What you guys are all probably really interested in is what we've seen in the cattle and hog markets. We can see cattle slaughter going back into April and May of 2020 was down significantly. As those plants began to put their PPE equipment into place, we started to see the processing facilities come back online, and cattle slaughter has mostly recovered. We're now right around year ago levels. I think we had some heavier animals move through the system as well. But that's good that we're seeing these facilities back up and running. I think what really, I got a lot of calls from producers, when the cattle slaughter went down and the cutout values went to record highs, the impact on the sector. We visited with the Secretary of Agriculture on a number of occasions to talk about that widespread between the cutout value and the live cattle prices. We had a cattle market working group, and I understand President Stephanie Smallhouse may have visited with you guys as well to talk about some of those issues. On the hog side, very similar story. We saw production decline significantly, and since that point in time, it started to bounce back to the extent that cumulatively, we may actually see pork production be about 1 or 2% higher in 2020 than what it was in 2019. Cattle, very similar scenario in terms of total production, may not be much of a drop, if at all, from what we saw in 2019. We are still dealing with a backlog of market-ready animals. If you can see the number of cattle on feed, how that dropped significantly in April and May, but then now we're sitting at the highest number, I think, for cattle on feed that we've seen going back as long as this series has been reported. So we've got a lot of animals ready to move through the pipeline. We've got heavier animals. I think we still got very strong demand for beef, but we have seen the prices rebound in recent weeks. I think looking forward, I think a lot's going to depend on how we deal with this third wave of COVID-19 and the impact on the economy and impact on demand. If you look here, the number of cattle on feed that were on for more than 120 days accelerated in the spring. Again, because we had market-ready animals, we just didn't have the hook space, so they sat on feed for a little bit longer, and that's come back down towards more normal levels. We've got heavier animals still coming to market, and that's what's helped with production keeping pace with prior year levels, even though the slaughter is lower, is the heavier animals coming online. So you can see our average steer dress weight's about 26 pounds heavier than what it was over 2019. On our barrel and gilt, the dress weights are also heavier there compared to last year, as well as the historical average. So that's what's helping the production keep pace with where we were last year. And you can see that here. This is the year-over-year change in beef production. It fell by about 34%. Same thing with hogs. It fell by about 34%. But you can see, especially on the pork side, we moved to above year-ago levels recently. And again, that's helping us keep pace with prior year levels in terms of total production. What has driven folks nuts this past year, and we're working on this issue, is the box beef cutout. You can see as retailers were scrambling to get access to beef during COVID, you could see that first price break that occurred in late March, right? When everyone remembers store shelves being empty. Matter of fact, the only thing that was on a store shelf out in Washington, D.C., where I live, was all the fake meat stuff. You could have got as much fake meat as you wanted. You couldn't get any ground beef, couldn't get any steaks. My local grocery store just put out a bunch of turkeys. That was the only thing I could buy for one particular week around here. And that was in March and April, that little bump in the box beef cutout. But then as these packing plants went down, retailers started scrambling to make sure that they had access and could keep a full meat case. And there's a limited amount of box beef that's not claimed for the retail market at any particular point in time. So that's what led to that rapid increase in the cutout value. At the same time, we were seeing feeder cattle and fat cattle prices falling. So the spread between the two got record high, and we're continuing to work on that. The Cattle Market Working Group suggested, improved risk management tools. So what we're doing, we've got a team together now. I had a meeting today with NCBA to let them know what we're working on. But we're going to try to create a new federal crop insurance product that will address the volatility on the cutout side, so that if producers see a box beef cutout price fall rapidly, they could get some sort of crop insurance indemnity. And we're going to explore how we could potentially even trigger an indemnity on the upside for that box beef cutout. Stephanie will be joining you guys tomorrow, so I'm not going to take all the thunder from the Cattle Market Working Group. I will tell you that the secretary reached out to us before they released their cattle market study and asked us to come visit with them. So myself, Scott Bennett, and Michael Nevue, we went over and sat with the secretary and gave him a pretty thorough rundown on what we've been observing, what our members have been telling us about what's happening in the cattle market. They had an investigation. I believe there's still an active investigation on this issue. The CFTC, President Duval chatted with the CFTC Chairman Tarbert, and they're actively investigating some of the issues that we've seen in the cattle markets. So we're working on this. We continue to work on it. We're going to try to deliver some new risk management tools, and then we do support a number of pieces of legislation that would support and get rid of some of the friction in the supply chain that would prevent interstate sales, or also help assist with small meat packers in the overtime, helping to cover some of those wages so the inspectors can be in the facility. So we continue to work on a lot of different issues. We also continue to keep our eye on the ball with respect to a minimum negotiated trade and what that would look like. We did talk to the cattlemen today, again, on their proposed rule. I think they're at 75% in the negotiated trade, and they've got these different triggers to evaluate whether or not there's enough movement in the cash market. So again, our staff is on top of this issue. Scott Bennett is very well respected here on Capitol Hill, and so is Michael Neville on the econ side. So we continue to work on this. And again, any questions you have, send them our way. President Smallhouse has been a part of this effort as well, so she can loop you in on the conversations that the 10 State Farm Bureau presidents had around issues in the cattle markets and how we're going to provide some solutions moving forward. And I also anticipate we're going to have a lively conversation on these issues. We'll have a lively conversation on MCOOL, country of origin labeling, all of that in January and December during the resolutions, but in January when the voting delegates to our 102nd convention gather. Moving past the cattle markets, a little bit about what's happened, in March, Congress and the president, we had the CARES Act. The CARES rescue package was a $2 trillion package, and we had about $23 billion set aside for agricultural producers. We had another $24 billion set aside for commodity food nutrition programs like the supplemental nutrition, to make sure that low-income households impacted by COVID-19 still had access to food. And so more dollars in their pockets to help them in this global pandemic. What USDA did is they took the $9.5 billion that was given to the Office of the Secretary and created a coronavirus food assistance program. We worked very closely with USDA as well as all the state farm bureaus to highlight the needs to producers, whether it was livestock producers, dairy farmers, pork producers, corn producers, wheat producers, on specialty crop producers on the needs. And that first package, I believe $10 billion, 10.3 has been paid in the first round of coronavirus. Then there was this CCC replenishment. So in around July, the Commodity Credit Corporation received a $14 billion replenishment, and USDA took that $14 billion and created a CFAP 2 program, Coronavirus Food Assistance 2, which provided additional support for field crops, additional support for specialty crops, eggs, poultry, specialty livestock, cattle producers, hog producers, dairy farmers, all eligible for assistance under CFAP 2. Matter of fact, more commodities were eligible under CFAP 2 than the first round of CFAP. So I think they were really trying to make sure that they got money to producers that needed it to help them bridge the gap as a result of COVID-19. We also, that comes on the back of 2 trade assistance packages. And so to help farmers that were impacted by retaliatory tariffs from China, the president, I believe, is around $28 billion in trade assistance dollars for producers. So quite a lot of ad hoc support flowed into the agricultural sector beginning in 2018, 2019, and into this year. If we add all of that up, and this is unprecedented, we haven't seen it before to this extent the amount of ad hoc support. $33 billion has gone out since 2018, and that doesn't include the $14 billion that's set aside for this next round of CFAP. It doesn't include any loans that will be forgiven under the Paycheck Protection Program, which I think many of our producers across the country utilize, our small businesses. And it doesn't include the $6 billion or so in disaster assistance from the Wildfires Hurricane Indemnity Program or the WIP Plus program. So significant amount of ad hoc support. I think that played very heavily in the media leading up to the election. A lot of folks pointed to the amount of dollars flowing to agriculture. And so it's going to be something that we're going to have to deal with, especially as we approach the next farm bill. If we look at money that's gone out the door in this latest package, we've seen $9.5 billion in support go out. So if you take that 9.5 that's gone out on top of the $33 billion, over 2 years, we're at more than $40 billion in ad hoc support has gone to the agricultural sector. And a lot of that money has flown into the Corn Belt, into Iowa, where there's intense livestock operation, and also in the areas where we have intensive livestock feeding operations as well. California, a lot of dairy and specialty crops has also received a significant amount of support through these multiple ad hoc assistance programs. Dealing with COVID-19 domestically was certainly a challenge. It's also created a challenge for us internationally. Ag exports in some of our top markets are down. Mexico exports are down 1.4 billion. Canada exports are down more than 300 million. In the European Union plus UK, we're down 145 million. Sales to India, Hong Kong, South Korea, Japan combined are down more than $2 billion. So, we're facing some headwinds in some of our top markets. The lone significant bright spot in terms of ag exports is China. And China has bought $3 billion more from us through September compared to the last year. And again, that's on the back of the phase one accord that has China slated to buy around $36.5 billion during 2020. USTR and USDA did issue a report recently that suggested China will likely meet about 70% of their purchase commitment. So the expectation is that China is not going to buy $36.5 billion. They'll probably buy somewhere in the neighborhood of $23-24 billion, I think, when all's said and done. We do see exports to China are up about 32%. They're above where they were before the trade war started, so that's a step in the right direction. But just to put it into perspective on where we need to be if we were going to hit the phase one target, we'd need to ship 18 billion over the next 3 months, October through December. That's $6 billion a month. Again, as USDA and USTR said, that's probably not going to happen. They did buy $3 billion from us in September. They bought a lot of livestock products, pork products, poultry products, cotton. They bought more, dairy. They're starting to accelerate their soybean purchases. But this is going to be a Herculean lift for them to meet their phase one goals. And I think everybody, now knows that, watching out over the next three to 4 months. What we've seen, in the last month or so, month and a half, is there's been very strong commitments to buy corn and soybeans. So the green bar here is how many soybeans are committed for export. So we're at about 1.8 billion. And what that means is either it's been put on a boat and shipped, or it is planning to be put on a boat and shipped at some point between now and the end of the marketing year, which is September. And these numbers update every week. As more people buy and as more people ship, the number can go up in terms of total commitments, and the number can go up in terms of what's been actually put on a boat and left our shores. Corn's the same way. I think we were at 1.3 billion bushels of corn committed for export. So very, very strong export commitments at this point. We're above 3 billion bushels. I think we're at 3.2. So that's a record. And so what that's done is that's helped to boost commodity prices. The weather event that we saw, the derecho that we saw in Iowa, has also helped to lift commodity prices. We're now looking at soybeans that are the highest they've been since 2016. They're over $11 a bushel. Corn's over $4 a bushel. That's great for the corn producer, probably not as great for somebody buying it and feeding it. So that may raise the cost for anybody, feeding livestock out there because of these higher prices. And if you look over the last, since August is really when that rally started to begin. Prices were just kind of sideways, from April and through the end of July. But once we had the derecho, once Chinese exports began to accelerate, African swine fever in Germany cut off one of China's key supply lines. So the Germans shipped a lot of pork to China. They got African swine fever. China stopped buying hogs from Germany. Oh, here they come to the United States buying more pork from us. And you can see the red line is the hog prices, and what they've done over the last 2 months has been absolutely phenomenal for the producer. Much, much higher hog prices. So kind of bringing all this home, what's this mean? And how's this going to impact us moving forward? So net farm income and expenses all together here on one chart. And I'll share all these slides because I know it can be a lot to kind of take in on the fly. But farm cash receipts from crop and livestock sales, the money that we're getting from the market, is projected currently at $358 billion. That's down $12 billion from last year. And that'd be the lowest level that we've seen since 2010. Now, I think that's going to change on the back of the higher corn, soybean, wheat prices, higher grain sorghum prices that we've seen over the last few months. So that number could go up. USDA will revise it in February. The government payments number is $37 billion. That's going to go up too, because we've now seen another $10 billion go out the door this year. But you take all of that into consideration. You take our production expenses off the table. We're likely going to see this year net farm income at the highest levels that we've seen since 2013. But a lot of that, again, is not from the market. It's on the back of government payments. Government payments are projected at around 40% of net farm profitability this year. And so that's going to play into the political environment as we move forward. It's almost like a false sense of security that things are getting better. It's very misleading that the farm economy is improving when you see that amount of government support coming into the sector. But it is going to be something that we're going to have to deal with. When we do the next farm bill, it's going to be something that folks that don't like the farm bill are going to point to. So this is going to make the next few years really challenging from a policy perspective, lobbying to protect programs like crop insurance programs in the farm bill. But again, that amount of federal support has helped to keep agricultural asset values stable. I think that's the one, if you look across the broader farm economy, without the support that we've had in the last few years, I think we'd see incredible pressure on land prices to move lower. And given that farm debt is close to $440 billion, which is a record, asset values are about $3 trillion. But if we saw any crack in land values, and if we saw land values erode by 10%, 15%, we'd all of a sudden be looking at debt to asset ratios that we haven't seen since the 80s. So I think keeping our land value stable has certainly helped. A low interest rate environment has also helped. So it's been easy to kind of roll short-term debt into longer-term debt. That's not a good strategy long-term, but I've talked to a lot of producers that have had to do that in recent years. So there's, the farm economy, I think these higher prices that we're seeing right now can certainly help. We need to see them stick around for a little bit so that folks can dig out of the hole that we probably dug ourselves in the last few years. And this is, one chart that I think kind of shows the difficulty we're going to have, moving forward. I talked to a lot of agricultural lenders that start to get pretty nervous when you take all the government support that's come the last few years, and all of a sudden that's not on a farm financial balance sheet. How do we start to pencil things out without, $30, $40, $50 per acre payments from ad hoc assistance programs. So it's going to be a challenging time moving forward. Hopefully we can get this money out of the market. We can see this trade continue to be strong. We've seen our crop supplies really tighten up the last month and a half or so. So hopefully this sticks around. But moving forward, I think that the conversation that we're starting to have more and more, and especially when we talk to our supply chain partners, the food and agribusinesses companies that are dealing with consumers on a day-to-day basis, what consumers want, and there's not even just consumers, investors, the investment community. It's all about environmental and social governance. So they're called ESG investors. And so whether that's an investor that's in putting their money in agricultural land, putting their money in McDonald's, putting their money in an energy index, they all want to know what these index funds or what these businesses are doing from a social sustainability perspective. And some of these investment portfolios won't invest in a business if they do not have a social sustainability scorecard. And so it's a conversation we're starting to have more and more is around climate and how do we deal with the immediate challenges that in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. So what we've tried to do is talk about agriculture, talk about the positive story of agriculture. We represent less than 10% of U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. We've made incredible gains in productivity over the last few decades, incredible gains in technology adoption. Livestock emissions are less than 4% of U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. So we're not the problem. We're part of the solution. And I've started to see, there's documents floating around from the transition team to potentially use USDA's Commodity Credit Corporation and the resources there as a means to pay farmers for their carbon sequestration efforts. So whether that's paying folks to get a cover crop in, paying folks to manage water quality or manage the soil, I think the Democrats and the folks in Washington, D.C. now are looking at that as a means to help generate some revenue, generate some carbon markets to help agricultural producers. So it could ultimately become another income stream. And this is, again, it's coming from the consumers, it's coming from the investors. And in talking to some of these folks, they feel like if you're proactive now on these issues, then we can avoid it being mandatory. We want voluntary incentive programs. The taxpayer has a big role to play in funding some of these sustainability goals. So I think the first 100 days of President-elect Biden's administration, there's going to be a lot of conversation around climate. And President Zippy Duvall always says, if you're not at the table, you're the meal. So we're going to have these important conversations with folks that are going to, our new leaders coming in on this to make sure that Farm Bureau's policy is well represented at the table as we move forward. And then the other thing that's on the table, I don't know when it's going to happen in this lame duck session, is another COVID relief package. The president did say today that he's not going to negotiate anymore. The White House won't with trying to get another stimulus package. But if we do see another stimulus package move, the Senate side does have additional resources to help agriculture. So we still have producers that have been damaged by COVID that have not received much help at all, whether they're contract poultry producers, contract hog producers. We've still got a lot of specialty crops and specialty livestock that may not have been assisted from USDA in response to COVID. So there's the potential that another package could be crafted during the lame duck. What we're also working on right now is a continuing resolution. There's Ag-Approach. We're sending a letter up to try to get some of our asks in the omnibus package, some of our funding needs that we have. On the livestock side, one of the biggest things to pay attention to is mandatory price reporting. If it's gone, I think December 11th. So if we don't have a continuation of mandatory price reporting, uh, and it lapses, then we lose a lot of information on what's happening in the livestock market. So we're going to be working with folks on Capitol Hill to make sure that we at least get a 1 year extension of mandatory price reporting. There's a lot of folks that want to talk about, the Grassley 5014 rule and whether that needs to be a part of mandatory price reporting. I think if we get this 1 year extension, we've got an opportunity to have a seat at the table as we figure out what the next version of mandatory price reporting looks like. The other issues I think that we're working on, we're doing a lot of work on the ag labor front. There was a new rule that was released by the Department of Labor to calculate the wage rate under the guest worker H-2A program. So we've been doing some work there. And then I think we're also actively working, trying to keep up with what the transition team is talking about doing here in Washington, D.C. So with that, I want to turn it back to you guys, Ken, President Fornstrom, to see if there's any questions that folks may have. It can be any question. It doesn't have to be about a chart or a slide that we had. And I'll try to communicate to the best of my ability what AFBF is doing on a particular issue. And I've got my phone here, so I will look for text. Is AFBF working with universities to get COVID impact numbers to producers? Let me call you, Ken. Let me get clarification. How's that work? Okay. Let me mute my phone. We have not conducted any official studies with the land grants on the impact of COVID-19 to the agricultural sector at this point. And many people asked us early on, what's the damage to the cattle sector? What's the damage to the dairy sector? We know that NCBA put out a number. I think they said 13 billion in damage. Pork producers said 8 billion. Dairy said, 6 billion in damages. So everybody had their own estimate. We did not contract with anybody to do an official estimate. And one of the reasons, we would point to where we needed support. And Congress gave USDA appropriated them 23 billion. We saw that immediately the secretary got that money out the door to producers. There's another 20 billion in the Senate package. So we were working with making sure that money got to people that needed it. And we did not do an estimate on the total damages. And one of the other reasons why is we're still in the middle of this thing. So it's hard to estimate the damage from the hurricane when you're still standing in the middle of it. I think when we get past this, uh, hopefully soon, when we get to the other side of this, we're going to look back, and we're probably going to be doing things a little bit different than we used to. I think there's every business is going to look back and say, how do I make sure my supply chain is flexible and prepared for something like this, even if it's a once in a lifetime event. It's going to change the way people do things. I mean, some people, depending on where you live, have been, living like this since March. It may change the way people go out to eat. It may change a lot of habits. And so, I don't think we can really assess the damage from this until it's in the rearview mirror. I hope that answers the question. And let me get back off mute. All right. All right. I hope next time I can come visit you guys and you can hear my Kentucky accent up close and personal.